The smell of sweat and leather wove thick through the cramped boxing gym, clinging to the stale air like a second skin. Neon lights hummed overhead, casting harsh white shadows against peeling brick walls lined with faded posters of past fighters, heroes long gone but never forgotten. The clang of metal weights and the sharp snaps of gloves striking heavy bags filled the cavernous space, muffled beneath the constant grind of grunts and the scraping shuffle of worn sneakers on scuffed flooring. It wasn't a place for fancy introductions or polite conversation. It was raw, merciless, and honest in a way that neither Rafe nor Eli quite belonged to, or at least, that's what they both told themselves as they stepped into the dim glow of the gym together. Rafe drilled his gaze on the cracking vinyl of a nearby punching bag, his fingers twitching with restless energy. He'd never set foot in a place like this before, his lean, muscular frame almost too deliberate in its careful control. The faint scar above his left eyebrow itched in a way that demanded irritation, but he forced himself still. This was supposed to be a community outreach project, a way for the gym kids and the office crowd to connect, or whatever the spiel was. He barely remembered signing up, and now he was shoved practically face to face with his assigned partner. Eli. The name slid off the coordinator's tongue like an afterthought, but there was something in the way they looked at Rafe that didn't quite sit right. Perhaps it was the apprehension flickering just beneath the surface. Or maybe it was the guarded defensiveness that mirrored his own. Eli was waiting across the cracked linoleum floor, leaning against the edge of a ring like he owned the place, his broad shoulders filling out a sleeveless shirt that revealed the tattoo of a boxing glove curling around his right forearm like a promise or a warning. Ash, blonde hair, tousled haphazardly, steel-grey eyes narrowed, sharp and unreadable. When their eyes met, the air thinned, taut with tension, neither wanted to acknowledge. Both men masked it with forced, brittle smiles. "So, you're the lucky one they paired me with," Eli said, voice low and rough like gravel, but with a dry humor buried somewhere beneath. He tilted his head, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I'm Eli." "Rafe," he replied, voice steady, even though his pulse kicked up into his throat. "Looks like we're stuck together for this project." His attempt at casual defiance sounded thin, but he clung to it. Eli chuckled, crossing his arms. "Stuck together. Yeah, that's one way to put it." The cold concrete beneath their feet seemed to echo their words, a reminder that neither of them had chosen this partnership. The project was a community outreach effort, getting people involved in fitness, promoting healthier lifestyles, but the real goal was diplomacy, teamwork, and breaking down barriers, or so the memo read. Neither Rafe nor Eli was likely to buy into the corporate spin. The fact they hardly knew each other only added to the weight pressing between them. Rafe shifted his weight, watching as Eli's gaze flicked around the gym, lingering just long enough on the worn speed bag to betray a familiarity with the place. "So, you've been boxing before?" he asked, trying to find something neutral, a way to tiptoe past the walls that held them both captive. Eli's smirk deepened, but there was no warmth behind it. "A bit! More than a bit, actually," Rafe nodded slowly, cheeks flushing with a mild sting that came from feeling so out of place. "Guess I underestimated this whole boxing gym vibe. I'm more the treadmill type." He laughed softly, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "No, I get it. Honestly? Thought this was going to be a joke when they handed me a partner who looks like he'd break if he hit a speed bag too hard." The jab was quick, sharp, and stung more than it should have. Rafe stiffened, ready to fire back, but then he caught something fleeting in Eli's gaze. Not contempt, exactly, but something heavier. A flicker of tiredness. "Maybe regret, fair," Rafe said, I don't exactly fit the stereotype. Neither do I, Eli admitted with an unexpected edge of honesty. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to push you. The words landed between them like a dare, and Rafe realized part of Eli wanted to see what he was made of, whether he'd crumble or fight back. The idea unsettled him, but beneath the irritation, there was a spark. Maybe reluctant curiosity. Maybe something else. What's your name again? Eli. And yeah, you're right. And we probably don't want to be here any more than the other. Eli's gaze sharpened. But we're here. The forced politeness edged out, replaced by something almost like acknowledgement. Neither wanted to admit it, but neither could ignore the strange pull of the situation or the grudging respect flickering beneath their banter. The gym seemed to close in on them then, the noise dimming just enough to make the moment heavier. They were strangers in an unyielding arena, thrown together with no roadmap, only the promise of shared struggle. Their first training session felt like being thrown into a tempest without a life vest. The gym's cacophony faded into a dull roar as Eli's presence grew larger, more commanding, with every punch that echoed off the walls. Where Rafe had expected a gentle introduction, he found himself caught in a relentless storm. "Keep your guard up," Eli barked, stepping in close as they circled the faded ring. "You're too tense. Relax your shoulders. Breathe." Rafe tried, but his muscles tightened like iron bands. He swung tentatively, each movement deliberate, calculated. A careful dance against a wall of inscrutable intensity. "You're holding back," Eli said, eyes narrowing. "What are you afraid of?" "Just trying to keep up," Rafe replied, frustration prickling under his skin. "I'm not a boxer." "Not yet." Eli's voice dropped to something almost encouraging. Then, just as suddenly, the edge returned. "If you don't push, you're wasting my time." The words hit harder than any punch. Rafe opened his mouth, ready to snap back with something biting. But before he could, Eli's expression shifted. For the barest fraction of a second, vulnerability cracked his armor. His jaw tightened, eyes flickering to some invisible wound beneath the surface. "You have no idea what it's like to be stuck in a place you don't belong," Eli said quietly, low enough that Rafe had to lean in to catch it. "Fighting every day, not just in the ring but with yourself." Rafe froze. The sudden rawness in Eli's voice unraveling something buried deep in him. He swallowed his own defenses, bending under the unexpected weight. "I'm not saying it's easy." Eli released the breath, the fight draining from his shoulders like air from a punctured tire. "But you have to fight. You can't just stand there waiting for someone to hand you a chance." Im's harsh fluorescent light caught the glint of sweat on Eli's brow, his bare arms taut and trembling slightly. For all the grit in his voice, there was exhaustion too, a quiet, grinding kind that only comes from a life lived in shadows and half-truths. Rafe's hands lowered slightly, the fight in him shifting, not away, but into something raw, more fragile. "I don't know if I can do this," Rafe admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "Not boxing, not with you. Not this project." Eli's gaze softened, the fire of confrontation cooling into something more steady. "You don't have to do it alone." The words hung between them like a fragile bridge, tentative and tremulous. Neither moved, but Rafe felt the tension loosen in his chest, just enough to let a flicker of trust sneak inside. They circled the ring again, less fractured now, and Eli guided him through combos with unexpected patience. Each punch, each block, was a small, victoryless, about mastery and more about presence, about seeing each other, even if just for a moment, beneath the layers of defiance and doubt. As the gym emptied, the distant clatter of folding chairs and muffled voices faded into silence. The harsh lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows where their footprints smudged in the dust. They sat on the edge of the ring, breathing heavy, muscles aching, sharing the quiet aftermath. Neither said much, but the silence was no longer sharp. It was a fragile truce, a tentative start. Eli glanced over, offering a crooked smile. "You got this," he said, voice low but sure. Rafe blinked, off guard by the sincerity behind the words. "Think I might," he muttered, surprising himself. The night stretched ahead of them, uncertain and unwritten. But for the first time, the weight didn't feel quite so heavy. Sometimes, all it took was one phrase, one shared moment, to open the door just a crack. And that crack was enough. The weeks that followed were a tangled mess of reluctant cooperation. The community outreach project, something neither of them had volunteered for, but were now inexplicably tethered by felt as heavy as weights dug into their shoulders. The assignment was supposed to be simple enough. Plan an event that would bring some goodwill to the neighborhood, showcase the gym's role beyond the punching bags and bruised knuckles. But for Rafe and Eli, those days ground forward with stubborn friction, their very different worlds sparking fires more often than lighting paths. "Look," Eli started one evening, leaning over the cluttered table in the back office where flyers and torn-up plans littered the surface. "The event's got to feel safe. Positive. Something people want to come back to next time. We need sponsors, and that means ironing out any angle that could get twisted in the press." Rafe shot him a narrow look, his fingers tracing the scar above his eyebrow absently, a habit that marked him as tense. "Safe's different for both of us. For you, maybe. Safe means spotless, drilled, and buttoned up. But the kids around here, they don't want safe so much as real. Raw real enough to grab their attention before it slips away." Eli's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "Not yet. Look at the system," Rafe pressed on, gesturing vaguely toward the gym walls that had overheard more arguments than smiles. "Stuff like this usually draws the same folks people who have everything sorted. They come, they talk, they leave like they did some charity. Me, I want it gritty. I want it to show someone out there understands what it's like to have the world grind at you." "I get that," Eli said carefully, "but the sponsors don't. They want polish for the cameras, for the packets they hand out. They want comfortable, respectable." "Comfortable doesn't punch back," Rafe growled, voice low and sharp. "You don't get respect by looking pretty for the cameras. You get respect by showing up, by surviving the fight." They stared at one another across the table, the air suddenly dense with something unspoken. The words weren't just about an event, it was everything beneath. The histories they'd brought here, unwilling to be smoothed over like frayed edges. "I'm not trying to erase where you come from," Eli said, a quiet concession. "But we do have to get this right, together. That means your reality and mine have to meet somewhere." Rafe's eyes flicked away. "And where's that, exactly?" Eli shrugged, an almost boyish grin breaking through his usual cautious exterior. "Maybe somewhere we both can stand without feeling like we're selling out, for a moment." The room was filled with tentative possibility, an acknowledgement of difference without erasure, a truce forged not from agreement but from recognition. Neither spoke, but the shift felt weighted, like the first faint crack in a wall built for protection. Shifting plans from stubbornness to something more collaborative, they kept at it. There were heated arguments about venue, tone, guest speakers, and quiet moments when the tension simmered into mutual understanding. Eli found himself respecting Rafe's fierce loyalty to his people and the unrelenting fire beneath his guarded exterior. Rafe, in turn, saw in Eli a steady strength, a dedication sown not from bravado, but from a deep-seated belief in structure and fairness. One night, after a particularly bruising phone call with a potential sponsor who wanted to impose restrictions that almost felt like betrayal, Eli left the office early. But as he turned the corner toward the gym's front entrance, a faint sound caught at him, the soft rhythm of gloves striking thin air, breath coming sharp but controlled. Inside, under the flickering fluorescent lights, Rafe was alone, shadow-boxing with a ferocity that seemed to pit him against more than just an imaginary opponent. The gym was silent except for the quick thwacks of his punches snapping into the air, feet shifting over the mat with precise, brutal intent. Eli paused in the doorway, watching. There was something about the intensity in Rafe's movements that spoke of more than physical exhaustion. It was as if those punches were carving out pain, releasing words he couldn't say. He had never seen Rafe, usually so cagey, this open with his struggle. Without quite knowing why, Eli stepped forward, his boots heavy on the mat surface, breaking the silence with the sound of his presence. Rafe didn't stop, didn't glance over. He just moved, a series of jabs and hooks that painted shards of anger in the stagnant air. Eli dropped onto the floor, sliding into a loose position across from him. He said nothing, offered no advice. He didn't need to. The temple of the gym, filled with sweat and echoes of past fights, was enough. The quiet company was enough. Rafe's breath hitched, sharp with effort and something else. Reluctance, maybe, or surprise at being acknowledged without judgment. After a few more swings, his hands dropped to his sides. He finally turned, muscles still trembling from the exertion, and met Eli's gaze. For a breath held between them, the usual walls were down. "You okay?" Eli asked, voice low, steady. Not an interrogation, but a check-in. Rafe shrugged, the motion heavy-weighted. "Just stuff." He swallowed hard. "Stuff that doesn't go away just because the lights turn off." "Yeah," Eli murmured, the single word carrying both understanding and solidarity. "I know about that." They sat there on the mat, two figures cloaked in sweat and silence, the night folding around them like a protective shield. No question of labels, no need for pretense. Just two men, raw and real, connected in the quiet aftermath of their own battles. Time stretched thin, and neither spoke what both were feeling. That in this fragile space, something unnameable had begun to root itself. A shard of trust, sharp and bright, promising that maybe they wouldn't have to fight alone after all. The quiet between them had settled thickly, like the night's humidity settling in the gym's peeling walls, but there was no rush to fill it. Rafe shifted, feeling the rough texture of the mat press against his palms, his muscles still trembling from the earlier exertion, partly fatigue, partly the quiet weight of words unspoken. Gaze flicked to the worn wooden bench nearby, the one scarred by years of punches and dropped sweat-soaked towels. He fought against the impulse to curl inward, to shut down the parts of himself that felt raw and exposed. But then Eli, as if sensing the tremor beneath his surface, didn't move or speak. He just sat there, his outline softened by the dim, yellow-hued lights, shoulders relaxed, yet steady, like the calm after a brewing storm. Finally, with a breath like dragging a fist through layers of cotton, Rafe's mouth parted. The words came slow, halting, as if each one was a reluctant knock on an old rusty door he'd sealed off long ago. "There was a fight," he whispered, eyes fixed somewhere on the scuffed floor, somewhere distant and dim. "Not in the ring." He hesitated, swallowing hard. The scar above his left eyebrow tightening under the weight of memory. When I was 16, my older brother, he got really mad one night. Something about money, missed school, something stupid. It ended with me on the floor. A broken nose, black eye. But worse, the words he called me. A lot of things. His voice cracked, quieter now. Things I tried to block out. Things that make me feel like I'm still trapped in that fight all these years later. Like every jab out, there was an echo of those nights inside the house. Eli was silent, his steel grey eyes narrowing slightly, not in suspicion, but in concentration. He didn't interrupt or offer a misplaced attempt at consolation. Instead, his gaze held steady, patient, as though leaning closer just with his presence was the kindest thing he could do. Rafe surprised himself by stealing a glance at him, half expecting the usual veiled judgment, or to see discomfort ripple across Eli's features. But there was none. Just quiet, acceptance hovering between them. "Why'd you tell me that?" Rafe finally asked, voice raw. Eli shrugged, a small, easy motion, but his reply was soft, sincere. "Because you don't seem like the kind of guy who carries shit around just to keep it hidden. And maybe because I've got my own scars. Different ones, but the same weight." Rafe blinked, the admission hitting him unexpectedly. A faint warmth spread under the sweat on his skin, the feeling of not being alone in his pain. It was strange, almost foreign, this quiet solidarity between two men who had barely let their guards slip in the harsh glare of the gym's artificial light. After a long moment, Eli reached into his gym bag and pulled out a crumpled plastic water bottle, unscrewed the cap, and held it out to Rafe without a word. The gesture was awkward, unfamiliar, like neither wanted to admit how much it mattered. Rafe took it, their fingers brushing briefly, a small electric jolt under the buzz of the gym's overhead fixtures. He drank slowly, the cool water soothing, more than just dehydration. Then, in a voice nearly drowned by the low hum of the city beyond the cracked windows, he said, "Thanks." Eli gave a knowing nod, and for a heartbeat they were just two men, sharing space and something fragile and rare, understanding without expectation. The bottle passed back and forth again between them, an unspoken pact, sealed under the tired, neon glow. Neither knew what this meant going forward, but the night had shifted. The heavy silence had thinned, replaced by something quieter, yet infinitely more promising. The days following that night found a subtle change in the rhythm between Rafe and Eli. Invitations to the gym became less cool and more routine, not exactly comfortable, but less guarded. The long hours bent over their shared project, a presentation they'd been tasked with in their otherwise gladiatorial world of punches and bruises, began to crack the veneer of their rivalry. Eli showed up with an energy Rafe hadn't expected. His usual stoic exterior softened against the echo of grunts and the thud of gloves against bags. "You know," Eli said one evening as they hunched over their notes in the barely lit locker room, "I'm starting to think this project is more torture than boxing camp." Rafe snorted a reluctant, breathy laugh that made his chest ache in a good way. "You're not wrong. I've been staring at the same damn Spetlar for 3 days." Eli leaned closer, eyes gleaming with mischief. "Maybe because your spreadsheet looks like it's survived a round in the ring." Rafe glared, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Oh, please, like you're some kind of spreadsheet savant." "Hey!" Eli shot back with mock indignation. "I may not bench press spreadsheets, but I can knock data out, cold." The corner of Rafe's mouth twitched up despite himself. "Data's not supposed to have a chin, idiot," they laughed quietly, the sound blending with the distant clatter of weights and the murmur of other athletes winding down. It was a small rupture in the tension that usually framed their interactions, but it felt like sunlight breaking through a barbed wire fence. As the nights wore on, the mocking banter became a strange sort of comfort. Eli started pulling casual jabs during their sessions. "You lift like you're scared of the weights." Rafe fired back. "At least I don't look like I'm trying to bench press my own insecurities." Neither of them really meant the barbs to sting. There was a heat to their teasing that warmed rather than burned. Underneath it all was a growing trust, an acknowledgement that beneath the bruises and scars lies something that battles need not be fought entirely alone. One evening, as they sprawled on a sagging couch in the far corner of the gym's lounge area, Eli tossed a worn pack of gum onto the floor. Rafe caught it, peeled it open, and popped a piece in his mouth. "Here's to us," Eli said, voice low and halfway between teasing and sincere, two assholes who somehow ended up as partners instead of enemies. Rafe's eyes met his. No smirks, no jabs, just a flicker of something real. Something like hope, riding on the edge of a grin. "Hell of a partnership," he said. Eli lifted an imaginary glass in the faint gym light. Hell of a partnership. For all the fights and bruises, the early mornings and endless drills, they were stitching together a fragile friendship, one that bore the textures of sweat, grit, and whispered truths under flickering fluorescent lights. The fight wasn't just in the ring anymore. It was in every late-night conversation, every shared confidence, every quiet gesture of understanding, and for the first time, neither of them felt like they were fighting alone. Eli sat with his back pressed against the cold concrete wall, the hum of the gym's ancient fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like an electric fog. The late-night air was thick with the lingering musk of sweat, old leather gloves and rusted metal. Every breath a reminder of every bruised conversation they barely survived. He shifted, rubbing at the tattoo on his forearm absent-mindedly. The ink feeling foreign tonight, like someone else's skin. "I'm not good at this," Eli finally breathed out, voice raw and uneven, like a fighter who's been rocked by a sudden crippling blow. The silence around them swelled, swallowing the space between his words before Rafe could respond. Rafe's eyes, sharp and steady in the dim light, didn't flinch. He just waited. Eli swallowed hard, looking at the floor. "Not this." The word hung between them, uncertain, fragile. "You know, all of it. The way this thing between us, whatever it really is, feels like it could snap in half the moment I try to say it out loud." He paused, biting the inside of his cheek, trying to remember how to be the man who was more than just fights and jokes. "I'm scared of what it means. What it might do to us." Rafe's heart tightened in his chest, but he didn't move to fill the silence with easy comfort or a joke to deflect. Instead, he offered something quieter, more significant, a space. "You don't have to say anything you're not ready to," he said softly. "This, whatever it's turning into, we don't need to rush it or fix it or even name it if it'd just make you uncomfortable." Eli's breath hitched. A quiet relief blooming inside the chest that had been tight and restless. "Not used to. Not knowing," he murmured. "Used to being sure of what I feel, what I want, who I want." He looked up, meeting Rafe's eyes, those deep brown pools that never blinked away. I thought I knew how this worked." Rafe shifted closer, the scrape of his jeans on the rough floor sounding far too loud in the silence. "You're scared of changing," he guessed, voice unsteady in a way that surprised even himself. "Of losing something. Of exposing something that maybe ain't supposed to be seen." Eli nodded slowly, the muscle in his jaw clenched tight. "Exactly. It's like I'm stuck between wanting to break the cage and terrified of what's waiting outside." For a long moment, neither spoke, just the rhythm of their breathing and the distant echo of water dripping somewhere unseen. Then Rafe reached out, barely brushing a hand along Eli's arm, his touch quiet, like the soft crackle of fire on a cold night. "I'm right here," he said, and the words felt like a pact, a promise not to push or pull too hard. No pressure, no expectations, just whatever you can handle. "We'll figure it out together." The weight in Eli's chest shifted, less of a knot, more of a loose thread unraveling hesitantly. "I don't really know how to say thank you for that," Rafe shrugged with a crooked smile. "You don't have to say anything. Just don't run. That's all I'm asking." "I'm not running," Eli whispered. The words tasted like hope and fear, rolled into one tangled breath. They stayed like that for a while, no need for more, the silence no longer empty but full of unspoken promises sown in the quiet corners of a harsh world. For all the years, Eli had slammed doors and shut out people who tried to get close. Maybe this was the first time he understood that being vulnerable didn't mean being weak. Maybe this was where it all began, right here, in this sketchy stretch of worn linoleum and flickering bulbs. Two flawed, stubborn men daring to hold something fragile. The night before the event arrived like a slow storm, rolling in with muted shadows pressed against the walls. Eli and Rafe found themselves leaning against the chain-link fence that bordered the back alley behind the gym, the distant city lights bleeding through the urban haze in an amber glow. The air smelled of rain and exhaust, sharp and green and alive. A raw contrast to the stale, sweat-soaked days inside. Eli's voice was low, hesitant, as if the words were fragile glass set atop a shaky table. "There's something I've never told you," he said after a long pause. Rafe's eyes flicked over, immediately alert, sensing the gravity cloaked in that simple admission. "You don't have to," he said softly, "but you can." Eli gave a humorless laugh, eyes fixed somewhere far in the distance. "You wouldn't really know this version of me. Not the guy everyone sees throwing punches or pretending life's a game just to keep the scars from bleeding. There's a side I bury deep." Curiosity prickled beneath Rafe's skin, sharpened by every moment of seeing Eli's rough edges, not just the exterior grit but the tremble in his voice tonight. "What side?" Back before all this, Eli nodded vaguely toward the gym, before the tattoo, before I could even hold a glove right. "I was somebody else." Rafe's heartbeat hitched. "What do you mean?" Eli looked down, rubbing the sleeve of his sweatshirt over his wrist. "I ran. Not just from punches or fights. I ran from myself, from my past. From the fact that I wasn't the guy people thought I was." "Like who?" Rafe asked, voice low, his gaze never leaving Eli. Eli swallowed hard, the confession hanging like rusted chains ready to fall away. "I was scared. Afraid to admit what I really wanted, who I really was. I buried it with anger, with pain, with every ounce of toughness I could fake. I wasn't proud of it. Hell, I don't think I was ready to face it." Rafe stepped a fraction closer, his voice gentle and patient. "Eli, whatever it is, you don't have to face it alone." Eli's eyes glistened, the sheen of unspilled tears or sweat he couldn't tell anymore, and for the first time the armor cracked. "I was closeted. For years. Not just to the world, to myself, too. Pretending to be straight wasn't just an act I put on. It was survival." Saying the words out loud felt like admitting I'd lose everything. Rafe searched his face, seeing the raw, bruised edges of a man who'd fought wars far beyond the ring. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if you hadn't run?" Eli's laugh was sharp, but sad. "Every damn day." I thought maybe I was too broken to be fixed, that no matter how loud I yelled or how hard I pushed, I'd always be fighting a losing battle. "And yet, here you are," Rafe said quietly. "Still standing, still fighting. Maybe not the battles you thought, but ones that matter." A slow smile pulled at the corner of Eli's mouth, a flicker of something softer, almost hopeful. "I didn't think I could be honest with anyone. Not like this." "Not about this. You're honest now," Rafe said, and it wasn't a challenge but an invitation. "With me?" Eli looked over at him, eyes dim yet fierce, the weight of years cracking in the corners. "You make it feel possible. Like maybe I don't have to be afraid of losing who I am. I don't want you to lose that," if said simply. "I want to hold on to it with you." His voice barely rose above the whisper of the night. For the first time since the gym had become their accidental refuge, Eli felt something stir, a fragile thread of trust winding through the cage of fear. The darkness wasn't so thick anymore, not when he saw the steady light in Rafe's eyes. Not when he realized maybe the fight wasn't about winning or losing, but about finding a place where scars could heal. The night stretched around them, silent save for the distant rhythm of the city, a steady pulse like a heartbeat. And in that quiet, uneasy space, something unspoken bloomed. A fragile promise born from whispered truths under cold stars. Eli gave a slow breath, steadying himself against the tide of his fears. "Thanks," he said hoarsely, "for staying. For listening. For not running away." "Wouldn't dream of it," Rafe answered, a flicker of that crooked grin softening his face. "Besides, who else is going to make sure you don't punch yourself in the face before the big day?" Eli laughed, the sound rough but real, a jagged crack in the night stillness. "Guess I'm lucky, huh?" "Yeah," Rafe said. "You're lucky." "You're lucky." "Because maybe I am, too." They stayed leaning against the fence long after the city gave itself over to sleep. Neither said much more, but the silence between them held a new kind of weight, not burdened by fear or doubt, but by the tentative promise of something that might just be worth fighting for. For the first time in a long time, Eli didn't feel the need to run, and that quiet understanding, fragile and raw, felt more like freedom than any victory in the ring ever could. The morning light filtered through the cracked windows of the old community center, painting the worn wooden floorboards with sharp lines of gold. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint, damp concrete, and the faint comforting musk of sweat, remnants of a city's grit, resilience waiting beneath the polished trappings of this on-day event. Rafe stood just outside the main hall, the buzz of voices spilling into the hallway like electricity. His heart thrummed with that familiar mix of nerves and adrenaline, the kind that made his palms sweat even when nothing was physically at stake. Beside him, Eli shuffled papers in his hands, jaw tight, eyes darting anxiously to the crowd, slowly gathering. The tattoo on his forearm caught the light as he flexed his fingers. That stark black boxing glove, a symbol of battles fought both inside and out. Neither of them said anything. Words felt heavy, unnecessary, when each breath seemed to mirror the other's. When it was their turn to step forward, the hum of anticipation stilled for just a moment. The auditorium was packed, a mix of community members, skeptical organizers, and a few familiar faces from the gym who had watched their rocky partnership with raised eyebrows and doubt. Those who thought they wouldn't make it, who had whispered that Rafe was too closed off or Eli too volatile. But they were here now, the two of them, side by side, poised and ready. "All right," Rafe's voice cut through the quiet, steady as a low tide. He looked over at Eli, catching the flicker of resolve in his partner's steel-grey eyes. "Let's do this." Eli nodded, breath steadying, and together they launched into their presentation. The words came easier than either expected, weaving carefully through the goals they'd worked toward, building a safe space, encouraging others to find strength in unexpected places, in vulnerability, as much as in fists raised in defense. Their voices, once hesitant and raw, now blended with a calm rhythm, a tandem heartbeat that surprised even them. "We want to show that fighting isn't just about aggression," Eli said, the first time his usual rough edge softened in front of a crowd. "It's about discipline, about respect for yourself and others. It's about learning to stand back up." Rafe picked up the thread, eyes scanning the audience, finding nods and thoughtful faces. "And sometimes it's about letting someone stand with you. Not just in the ring, but out here." He gestured broadly. "In life. No longer merely teammates dragging one another through a dreaded project. They had become something else. A unit forged in the quiet crucible of late nights, honest talks, bruises both physical and emotional. Their movements were smooth. Now, like a well-rehearsed dance, when Eli stepped forward to share a story about the boxing gym's rough edges, Rafe's smile was a steady anchor behind him. When Rafe described the small victories of breaking down barriers between people, Eli's attentive gaze never wavered. The crowd's reception was warmer than either had dared hope. Applause rose in waves, some tentative and polite at first, but gradually more sincere and fervent as their message settled in. A woman near the front caught Rafe's eye and smiled, nodding with quiet approval. A group of teenagers whispered excitedly among themselves, tugging at their parents' sleeves. As the last words rang out, Rafe and Eli exchanged a glance that needed no translation. The bond they'd hidden beneath cynicism and bruised pride now glimmered plain as day shining, through in the unguarded pride that lit their faces, in the gentle, almost imperceptible brush of Rafe's fingers against Eli's arm as they gathered their materials. Later, outside in the pale afternoon sun, chatter of the crowd swirled around them like a new current. Eli leaned against the brick wall, the shadows of the afternoon stretching long and thin. His breathing was deeper now, less tight around the edges. "You really knocked it out of the park," he said, voice low but rough with something like awe. Rafe shrugged, that crooked grin a little wider. "Guess you weren't so terrible yourself." Eli's laugh came easy this time, genuine, and for a beat he looked like he might reach for something more, maybe a joke, a question, an invitation. Instead, he held Rafe's gaze a moment longer, the kind of quiet that carries more weight than any stubborn silence. "You hungry?" Eli asked suddenly, the question hanging in the warm air between them like an offer. Rafe cocked his head, skeptical. "Hungry, or just avoiding going home to your empty apartment?" Eli's grin sharp, but honest. "Maybe both. There's that late-night diner across the street. I know you hate greasy food, but they've got the best coffee." There was an edge of impulsiveness in his tone, a rare bump in the otherwise calm surface they shared. Still, it felt right. Like a first step onto something uncharted. Rafe hesitated just a second, then nodded. "Okay." "Let's do it." The diner's neon sign buzzed faintly as they pushed open the door, the scent of frying onions and slick maple syrup greeting them like old friends. It was the kind of place that wasn't fancy, but had character piled in the cracked booze and checkered floor, an anchor for souls needing to drift away from their day's battles. They slid into a booth by the window, a sticky menu between them and a pitcher of coffee that steamed invitingly. The hum of late-night regulars, the clink of cutlery, and the distant sizzle of eggs on the grill wrapped around them in a cocoon of mundane comfort. For a while, their conversation wove through the safe territory, mocking the ridiculous prices on the menu, groaning over their own caffeine dependence, comparing notes on the event's surprise guests. "You know," Rafe said, stirring his coffee absently, "I never thought we'd actually pull it off." Eli's eyes met his over the rim of his glass. "Neither did I." Hell, I was ready to bail halfway through. The laugh that followed was easy, but something in the way Eli looked at him held a thread of something deeper. Vulnerability, maybe. "You kept me from doing that." "More than just staying late or helping with the presentation." "I don't know what you saw in me, but it mattered." Rafe's fingers tapped rhythmically against the table, his mind tracing back over all those bruised evenings, the walls they fell through, the silences turned soft by unspoken understanding. "I don't think it's about seeing some ideal version of each other," Rafe said quietly. "Maybe it's about accepting the mess, what's real underneath it. You with all your walls and fists and scars. Me with my own baggage. We made this work because we stopped pretending it had to be perfect." Eli nodded slowly, as if saying this aloud helped strip away some layer of armor he hadn't realized was weighing him down. It's scary, you know, letting someone in. Feeling like maybe for the first time in a long while, you don't have to fight alone. Rafe reached across the table, brushing his knuckles briefly against Eli's. It was a small, deliberate touch, one that spoke louder than 1,000 promises. "Maybe that's the real win," Rafe said, voice low and steady amidst the diner's low hum. "Not the project, not the crowd applauding, but finding someone who'll stay with you when it feels like the whole world might let go." Eli's steel grey eyes softened, a guarded wall crumbling just enough to show a sliver of hope. "So what now? We just keep fighting together." Outside the ring, Rafe's smile was slow to come, but genuine, warmed by the weight of all the late nights, the hard truths, the shared silence. "Yeah," he said, "I think we do." Outside, the city lights flickered, the night folding around them in quiet witness. In the booth at the corner diner, two men built something fragile, but real, thread by thread, between heartbeats and shadows, and a neon glow and the soft clink of coffee mugs. And for the first time it felt like freedom. Not from the fight, but from fighting alone. The diner was quietly humming around them, muted conversations from neighboring booths, the gentle scrape of chairs on linoleum, the faint hiss of the coffee machine brewing another round. Outside, the city's restless pulse softened behind fogged-up windows, orange streetlights arcing their glow like lazy sentinels guarding the slow unraveling of their night. The world had receded, leaving only the small sanctuary where Rafe and Eli sat, side by side, bridging a gap neither had dared cross till now. Rafe reached instinctively for his coffee cup, fingers curling around the cool ceramic just as Eli's hand moved toward the same rim. Their hands brushed barely more than a flicker of contact, but it sparked through Rafe like an electric charge, a sudden shock that caught breath and heartbeat by surprise. It was a brush so light, so accidental, it might have gone unnoticed had their senses not been unwound and on edge. Loose threads, threshing at years of self-denial, knotting tight in the silence that followed. For a breath, neither moved. The ambient noise dimmed in their ears, and time slackened. They both sat frozen, caught in the sudden proximity of skin against skin, the slight warmth of Eli's hand ghosting under Rafe's knuckles. It was a pause that swallowed words, an unspoken question hovering like smoke between them, thick with possibility and caution. Rafe's fingers twitched, not away but tighter around the cup now, as if grounding himself against that unexpected jolt inside. His heart thudded with a new kind of urgency, not the cagey adrenaline of the ring, but something raw and unguarded. Eli's gaze met his eyes wide but not blinking. Steel-grey eyes suddenly liquid under the soft diner light, shimmering with a vulnerability that felt almost sacrilegious in their world. Neither said a word. There was no need. Silence smoothed the edges of the moment, made it safe and trembling all at once. It spoke louder than confessions, louder than the sweat-slicked punches and grudging teamwork of endless weeks. This was something different, a truth precarious enough to shatter everything they'd built, yet delicate enough that neither dared shatter it. Rafe swallowed the lump in his throat, pulsing with the weight of 1,000 things never said. His mind raced back to every time he'd shoved down what felt like a quiet fire, inside every look averted, every feeling crushed beneath the clang of gym work and survival instincts. He had always told himself this was about discipline, about control, about toughness. But now the ache in his chest whispered a different language, raw and unvarnished. Eli's hand lingered fractionally longer than necessary before drawing back, folding around his own cup as if to anchor himself. His jaw tightened, the faint tremor in his fingers betraying the steel exterior he wore like armor. "I didn't mean to," he started, but the words caught and fell away, swallowed by the hush between them. "It's okay," Rafe said finally. Voice low enough to almost be a secret. "Don't have to say anything." His words seemed to break the spell just enough for both to breathe, but not enough to erase the weight of the moment. They both had been walking precariously close to the edge of something dangerous, and now they'd stepped right over, silent witnesses to a shift neither could easily rewind. Rafe glanced down at his, coffee dark and bitter, the way he preferred it, feeling suddenly exposed, a rawness beneath his skin that was more than just tiredness. "This project," he began hesitantly, "it's forced me to face a lot more than I thought it would. Not just the work, me, the stupid parts I keep locked down." His words seemed absurdly small, poor suits for the heaviness of what he carried inside. Yet there was no pretense or bravado now, only the bare tremor of real admission. Eli's gaze softened, drawing in like a slow breath. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Same here. I thought I was just dealing with the damn project, deadlines, the bullshit expectations. But it's been like a mirror shoved in my face. I haven't looked that closely at myself in so long. Probably never this close." He ran a hand through his messy, ash-blonde hair, the movement slow and deliberate, a gesture of self-comfort, or maybe hesitation. Rafe reached out again, fingertips grazing the scar above his left eyebrow, as if trying to scratch away memories embedded in skin. "The fight," said softly. "The thing I'm supposed to be good at. I've been scared." There it was. The admission bare as bone. Scared to hope, scared that, if I let myself hope, I'll just crash harder when it all falls apart. Eli nodded, that expression of steel-grey eyes turning glassy with empathy. "I get it. I've been scared, too. Scared that this." He gestured vaguely toward the table, toward the space between them that had quietly filled with unspoken meaning, that whatever this is, it's just some mistake I'm going to regret. But it's not. A soft chuckle, shaky but real, escaped Rafe. "No regrets, huh? I don't even know what that looks like anymore. I'm used to pushing through pain, through disappointment. But maybe I'm ready to learn something different." A quiet hope settled over him, fragile but stubborn. Eli looked down at his coffee cup, tracing the rim with a thumb, as if the donut of ceramic held answers. "This project," he repeated, "it forced me to confront things I've carried for years. Not just inside the ring, not just with other people, inside me. I hated admitting that. I hated needing anyone." Rafe's eyes searched Eli's face, seeing the cracks beneath the tough surface, the scars that weren't just skin deep. "You're not alone in that," he said, voice steady. "I've spent so much of my life pretending I didn't need anyone. That needing someone was weakness. But talking to you, working with you, it's shown me that maybe it's strength. The kind of strength that doesn't come from muscles or endurance. It comes from trust." Eli's expression flickered with something unguarded, something almost afraid to bloom. "Trust," he murmured. "Hardest damn thing to give. And yet here we are." "Here we are," Rafe echoed. The words tasted like something dangerous and wonderful all at once. They let silence settle around them again this time. It wasn't a chasm, but a soft place to land. The quiet carried the weight of late nights, wrestling with fears and dreams, of broken defenses and unfinished healing. It was a shared understanding that spoke in the pauses between breaths, in the steady warmth of two cups, in the subtle shift of bodies leaning just a little closer across the narrow table. For a long moment, they simply sat in that fragile peace, letting the city's night cradle them. The smell of coffee, sharp and grounding, mingled with the faint trace of sweat still clinging faintly to their clothes from hours ago in the gym. The diner was a cocoon and invisible bubble, where time slowed and the world's judgment faded to a whisper. Inside it, two men who had been strangers, then wary partners, now sat as something unspoken and yet deeply understood. Rafe dared a glance at Eli's tattoo, faded boxing glove inked on his forearm, a symbol of fights fought and battles survived. It was a reminder of all that hardened and scarred them, but also of all they had left to live for. "You ever think about what comes after all the fights?" he asked, voice rough. Eli met his eyes, leaning back slightly, a smile teasing at the corner of his mouth, brief and fragile. "I used to think I just wanted the fight, the pain, the exhaustion. I thought that was all there was. But now, I think maybe I want more. I want someone who stays after the fights are over. Someone who doesn't walk away at dawn." Rafe's chest tightened with something like longing, something painfully familiar and new all at once. "Someone who stays," he repeated softly. The words were a promise neither dared speak aloud, but both could feel thrumming between them. In that quiet diner booth, under the flickering neon and the tired weight of the city night, two men found courage in knowing they didn't have to fight alone. Not just after the project, not just as gym partners, but as something more, something neither had expected, but both quietly hoped for, and for the first time, the night didn't feel quite so heavy. The neon haze of the diner's sign flickered out slowly as dawn edged over the city, soft pale light teasing the corners of the darkened street. They stepped out side by side, the heavy silence between them no longer weighted with awkwardness or unspoken fears, but instead filled with a fragile warmth, like the early blush of morning sun grazing cold skin. Their feet moved slowly, deliberately, matching each other's pace through cracks in the pavement and the scattering of early walkers, shaking off the last vestiges of night. Neither spoke, though the absence of words was no longer an avoidance but a quiet agreement, a rare kind of peace that didn't need definitions or labels to prove itself real. Rafe glanced sideways, catching Eli's profile against the ghostly pale sky, hair tousled as if the night itself had tousled it. The lines of tension that usually etched Eli's jaw had softened, and the faintest hint of a tired, genuine smile lingered at the edges of his lips. Somehow the distance that had defined them, that sharp edge of doom lurking in every interaction, had fractured, broken away, like glass shattered by something tender and unexpected. His own heart thudded with a strange, buoyant weight, like the moment right before a fight when fear and hope bubbled into something utterly alive. He wanted to say something, anything that could solidify the delicate truth hanging between them, but the words caught in his throat. What could he say that wouldn't cheapen this slow, unspoken coming Toby? "You got this?" Eli had told him hours before. Words that buzzed like quiet electricity even now.